Roz was the first to arrive at the next dawn truce. She had an important announcement to make. The robot patiently waited in the great meadow as the sky slowly brightened and the animals slowly gathered. And once everyone was milling around and chatting, Roz began speaking in her perkiest voice. "Pardon the interruption. If I could please have a moment of your time." The crowd settled down and listened to their robot friend. "We made it through a terrible winter. A new generation of youngsters is arriving, and my son Brightbill has just returned to the island with his flock. I think we can all agree that there is much to celebrate. So in addition to the dawn truce this morning, I would like us to have another truce this evening. We can call it the evening truce, or better yet, the party truce." The crowd began chattering with excitement. "I have planned a celebration," Roz continued, "and you are all invited. I will take care of everything. Just meet me back here at dusk. Oh, and I have a little surprise. Actually, it's not little, it is quite large. The point is, I have planned a celebration, and I hope to see you all there." "Sounds great, Roz, but I'm afraid there's one problem with your plan." Mr. Beaver blinked his beady eyes. "The moon won't be out this evening, so it'll be too dark for any of us to see." "You are half correct," said Roz. "Tonight will be moonless, but it will not be dark, I promise. Now, if you will excuse me, I must prepare for our party. I will see everyone back here at dusk." Dawn turned to day, day turned to dusk, and just as Rod had asked, animals were gathering again in the great meadow. Word had spread across the island. The fuss seemed to be about a giant stack of wood. Roz had spent the day collecting logs and branches and stacking them in a perfect massive tower. The animals crowded around it, trying to imagine its purpose. And then they saw a golden light flickering in the distance. Roz emerged from the dark forest, and in her hand was a flaming stick, which she held up like a torch. She was camouflaged in thick mud and clusters of wildflowers, but her camouflage wasn't for hiding. It was her party dress. The animals watched as the robot glided across the meadow, surrounded by a warm glow. As she joined the crowd, she said, "Thank you all for being here. 1 year ago, I awoke on the shore of this island. I was just a machine. I functioned. But you, my friends and my family, you taught me how to live, and so I thank you." "No, thank you, Roz," shouted a voice. The robot said, "You have also taught me to be wild. So let us celebrate life and wilderness together." At those words, Roz heaved her torch high into the air. It soared up, 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 and landed at the very top of the wooden tower. A ball of fire burst towards the night sky, and suddenly the meadow was bathed in firelight. Hundreds of shining eyes watched as bright flames crept down the sides of the tower, and embers floated away on the breeze. The animals stepped toward the bonfire, eager to feel its warmth, and then stepped back, afraid of feeling too much, and soon everyone was moving. The deer started leaping, the foxes started trotting, the snakes slithered, and the insects buzzed, and the fish jumped from the river. Brightbill led all the birds into the air, where they wheeled around the bonfire like a tornado of feathers. Roz sprang into a wild dance, her shaggy dress shaking and swishing with each moment. It was a wild party, and it took our robot to make it happen. Roz and the animals partied all night long. They were so busy singing and laughing and dancing, they didn't see the cargo ship as it sliced past the island, but the ship saw them. It saw the towering bonfire. It saw the robot. And then it quietly continued into the darkness. By dawn, the bonfire had dwindled to a smoking hill of ash. Everyone had gone home, and only Roz and Brightbill remained in the meadow. They lay in the grass together, watching the soft light of the morning crept up from the horizon. And then Roz says, "Let's go for a walk." The robot and the goose hiked and flew up to their favorite spot on the grassy ridge. But then they kept going. They followed the ridge to the mountain and climbed all the way up to the craggy peak, just in time to see the sunrise. "I climbed up here once before," said Roz. "I sat at the very rock, this one right here, looked out on the island. I thought I would always be alone." "Are you happy, Ma?" said Brightbill. The robot thought for a moment. "I am. I'm happy too." Brightbill closed his eyes and felt the wind and the sun. There was a slight chill in the air that made him feel alive. Everything seemed just right. And then he heard a distant buzzing sound. The goose squinted to the south and saw a familiar shape in the sky. He turned to his mother and said, "Ma, there's an airship flying this way." Hello, Rosalind Unit 7134. We are RECOs, R-E-C-O-S. We are here to retrieve all Rosalind units. A cold, flat voice came from RECO 1. He and his partners stood absolutely still and kept their glowing eyes locked on their target. There are 4 others, said Roz. But they're dead. We already have located the remains of the other units, said RECO 1. We will collect them later. Now come with us. The 3 RECOs motioned Roz to the airship, but she didn't move. Where did you come from? She said. The RECOs turned and stared at Roz. Do not ask questions, said RECO 1. Where will you take me? Do not ask questions. Why must I leave? Do not ask questions. I will not go anywhere until I get some answers. There was a brief silence as RECO 1 computed his next move, and then he began to speak. 1 year ago, a cargo ship carrying 500 Rosalind units was sunk by a hurricane. 495 units have been retrieved from the ocean floor. We have come here in search of the last 5, and we have located them. Rosalind Unit 7134, you are the property of Tech Lab Industries. We will return you to the factory where the makers will refurbish you and sell you to a worksite. You will then live on that worksite indefinitely. Now come with us. But I live here, said Roz. That is incorrect. Rosalind 7134, any further resistance will be proof of defectiveness and we will deactivate you. But Roz had more questions. Who are the makers? What's my purpose? Why can I not ask questions? RECO 1 said to his partners, this unit is defective. Commence deactivation. In perfect unison, the RECOs stepped toward Roz. They raised their blocky hands, ready to restrain their target, ready to shut her down with the press of a button. But a loud squawk and a streak of feathers cut them off. Stay away from my mama! Bright Bill swooped into the meadow and started hopping around, ready to defend his mother. The RECOs stopped and looked at the goose. Of course, they didn't understand his words. They heard only meaningless squawks. And then they heard their target squawking back at them. Bright Bill, get out of here, Roz said in the language of the animals. These robots are dangerous. What do they want, Mama? They want to take me away. The RECOs stared at their target, trying to understand why she was exchanging noises with the goose. And the new noises began rising up. Rustling and shrieks echoed the forest. Animals were gathering. Their wild voices called to one another. Roz needs help. These robots want to take her away. We have to do something. The uproar of the forest grew louder and louder. The RECOs peered past Roz toward the mysterious sounds, but saw only foliage. Suddenly, shadows swept across the meadow, and Bright Bill's flock dove into the RECOs. The geese furiously flapped and pecked and wrapped their wings around the robots' faces, clinging to the RECOs like feathery masks, distracting them, blinding them. Bright Bill turned to his mother. Run, he said. While his flock distracted the RECOs, Bright Bill darted around behind them and desperately searched for buttons. He had once shut down his own mother with a click, and now he was sure he could do the same thing. But he found no buttons on those robots, only smooth surfaces. Clearly, the RECOs were not designed to be shut down so easily. Giant hands swung through the air, and the geese were swatted away. Loudwing was plucked by her foot, flung to the ground. She crawled into the woods as the others scrambled up and over the trees. A quick scan by the robots revealed that Roz was gone. The 3 RECOs turned and marched to the airship. The door hummed open, and the robots disappeared inside. And when they stepped back into the meadow, each was holding a long silver rifle in his hands. The hunt for Roz was on. Without speaking, the RECOs marched away from one another, fanning out in their standard search pattern. RECO 1 marched straight towards the southern tip of the island. RECO 2 marched straight up the mountainside. And RECO 3 marched straight into the forest. RECO 3 marched through the forest with steady, stomping strides. His blocky head swiveled from side to side, scanning for any sign of Roz. But he was distracted. You see, everywhere the RECO went, he was met by shrieking animals. He didn't know it, but he was in the midst of a coordinated assault. Swooper hooted orders from above. Hawks, sparrows, owls, dive in front of the eyes. Fink barked orders from below. Hares, weasels, foxes dashed between his legs. The forest was seething with an army of wild animals distracting the robot, luring the terrible thing deeper into their trap. Chit-Chat leaped out from the branches and clawed at the robot's eyes, yelling, anyone who shows up on our island and tries to take my friend's mother away has a big problem with me. And then she leaped back into the branches. The robot pointed his rifle at the squirrel and pulled the trigger. A blazing beam of light shined through the forest and sent tree limbs crashing to the ground. It grazed poor Chit-Chat, singeing the end of her tail, but she ignored the pain and scurried up to the safety of the canopy. With each strike, the ground grew a little softer, and the robot sank a little deeper, until he was up to his waist in thick, heavy mud. His churning legs slowed to a stop, and he stood there computing whether to move forward or backward. Rico 3 was now an easy target. "Begin the bombardment," ordered Swooper. The sky darkened as a swarm of birds descended from the treetops. They swooped past the robot and platted his face with their dropping. Bird after bird swooped and splattered, and Rico's eyes were instantly caked. "Don't let up," screeched the owl. "Give it everything you've got." There seemed to be an endless stream of birds with an endless amount of droppings. Rico 3 let go of his weapon and wiped his filthy face with both hands. That was the moment the fuzzy bandits had been waiting for. They dashed out from the woods, snatched the rifle with their nimble hands, and dragged it away. Tawny and Crown Point looked on from the underbrush. The buck lowered his head, and the raccoons carefully placed the rifle upon his antlers. Then the deer and the raccoons slipped into the shadows. By the time Rico 3 realized his weapon was missing, it was too late. He let out a sad electronic tone, and then the birds continued their bombardment. The robot turned and blindly trudged back through the muck. It was now time for the final stage of the plan. Broadfoot the bull moose emerged from the trees and stood directly in the path of the blind robot. Rico 3 had no idea that every step brought him closer to the mighty animal. When the robot was in range, Broadfoot turned and kicked back with his powerful hind legs. There was a crack, and dung sprayed from Rico's head. The moose kicked again, crack, and the robot's head flopped to one side. A tear in his neck exposed a tangle of silver tubes, but Rico 3's legs kept pumping, so Broadfoot kept kicking. He pounded the robot's head with heavy hooves, denting and cracking into the ugly shape. With one final crack, the head broke loose, soared through the air, and squelched into the mud. The headless robot fizzled and smoked. His legs ground to a halt, and he never moved again.